this is very important. It's very important that we mark our heroes and heroines who are doing this. It's very important that we don't just notice the shock and the fear and the capitulation stories, but actually the motion that we need is to identify the areas that are growing and to continue supporting those, swapping those stories as often as possible, because that courage begets courage. And we then need to create systems that begin moving towards mass, larger scales of non-cooperation. And that is how authoritarians are destabilized and typically taken out through civil resistance.
The Quaker
podcast.
Story, spirit, sound.
In times of political upheaval, when institutions feel unreliable and the future uncertain, how do we find our footing? How do we resist authoritarianism without becoming what we oppose? I'm Zach Jackson, and today on the podcast we're featuring an interview with John Watts and Daniel Hunter. Daniel discovered his answer in an unexpected place. As director of Choose Democracy and a seasoned organizer, Daniel has spent decades fighting for social change. But it wasn't until Trump's election that he found himself claiming an identity that he'd been circling for years, that of a Quaker. In our conversation, you'll hear how 400-year-old Quaker principles are providing a roadmap for modern resistance, why Daniel believes we're witnessing massive acts of civil disobedience that are going largely unnoticed, and how spiritual grounding can fuel sustained political action without burning us out. This is a conversation about finding strength in uncertainty, courage in community, and hope in the midst of chaos. It's a conversation that is vital, timely, and filled with practical resources for resistance. Speaking of practical resources, we called up George Lakey to answer a listener question about what to do when protests turn violent. So make sure you stick around to the end of this episode to hear his suggestions as well. And now, without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Daniel Hunter.
Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I wonder if we could start with you telling us a little bit about your spiritual journey and how you found your way into Quakerism.
Well, I hate the phrase, but it would be somewhat appropriate to say that Trump made me Quaker. I've been next to friends for quite some time. So I've been a friend of friends, or, I'm a lowercase f friend. I've joked that way for quite some time as someone who I went to Earlham College, Quaker school. I worked at Training for Change, a Quaker organization led by George Lakey. I have attended meetings periodically and often found them blissful and occasionally overly quiet as someone who grew up in the Black Baptist Church. And after Trump won, there's a moment where I was being asked by a reporter. They asked me with great passion a kind of question like, how do we make it through? Like, how will we survive these times? And there was kind of both not just them, but not just as a reporter, but like personally, like, how do we? And so, we talked for a while and eventually they asked a question that surprised me, which was some variant of, how do you hope that Trump supporters get their comeuppance in the time ahead? How do you hope that they suffer out of this? Learn the error of their ways, some version of that. And I remember my media training, which is don't answer a tough framing like that. Don't bite. And so I've tried to back up in my mind of what do I really want to say here? What's the most important true thing? And I slipped pretty far in to what's the most true thing in the moment. And so I answered, that way you probably had that experience where you've talked faster than your mind is processed. And I said, look, I'm Quaker. What that means is I believe there's that of God within every person. And so what needs to happen in the time ahead is each person needs to get greater access to the inner divine, to the spirit that moves within all things. And that's what needs to happen in these times ahead. So later I laughed about it with my wife. Ha ha ha, that's so funny. I must be really tired because that's not how I have identified. And the next day I had another interview with another reporter, and same set of questions came up. Another version of like, how do you hope people suffer? And so I was like, well, I won't answer as flippantly. I'll find something that's more me. I won't answer the way I did last time. And so I was like, okay, what's most true? So I took a pause and said, okay, well, look, I'm Quaker. What that means is I believe there's out of God within every person, and on. So it all felt right. And so that would be my moment of being convicted, convinced as it were. But I feel of a kind of exposed as a Quaker who hadn't anticipated it that way.
So given all that, Daniel, what wisdom do you think Quakerism offers us in this moment?
Well, the piece that I don't know what it offers to others. I know what it offers to me. What it offers to me is, well, I'll back up this way, which is I think we're entering in a moment which Trump is moving as an authoritarian, and there is something in the atmosphere. I've been meeting with a group of spiritual folks who are all kind of from different philosophies of life, but all exploring what is up with these moments, what is up in this times. And one of the things that we did at one moment was ask ourselves, what are all of the things that we are reducing trust in during these times? And we began listing things that people and ourselves and others have reduced trust in media, reduced trust in mainstream institutions, government institutions are less reliable, less trust in whether or not we're seeing things that are true online, whether or not people have real information. And we just began listing the number of things. We're in a moment in which reduced trust in the weather, I mean, the uncertainty that we've come with about what weather patterns will be like, due to climate change. And there's a lot of very large reasons to trust things less. And that's a attribute of these times. And so in comes an authoritarian who says, trust me, because I will give you certainty in a time of uncertainty. The whole system is broken because there are immigrants who are in this country who are ruining it for everyone. If we got rid of them, we'd be fine. And that provides us a shortcut emotionally, mentally, for people who are trying to deal with the amount of uncertainty and the amount of distrust. Focus it in on one thing. A different option is to hold on to a level of uncertainty. But in order to do that, you have to have some things that steady you. And so I think one thing that Quakerism offers is a kind of a steadiness, a faith in a being larger than yourself that is guiding, that is providing wisdom, that's offering wisdom in these moments. But it also provides a way that navigates through, for me, a way to not turn into my opponent, to not become destructive. And just today, actually, we saw someone who was so frustrated who they shot two Israeli folks at a museum, who were gathering at a museum. And they were frustrated by this incredible genocide that's happening in Gaza. And the frustration I can join with, and the acts of violence as a way of trying to resolve are abhorrent. And that Quaker understanding of abhorrence to violence is steadying. The belief that everyone has that of the divine within them keeps me from that kind of action, because instead I'm interested in, how do I tap that of God within every person? How do we help everybody find that greater wisdom, that greater voice? And that's a deep spiritual task that does not allow the kind of shortcuts that violence suggests, or the kind of shortcuts that an authoritarian suggests. And so it keeps us on a particular kind of path. But I think that there's an interesting thing happening in these times, which is during such moments of rupture that we're experiencing, it's not just a rupture of politics. It's not merely a rupture of economic order. There's a rupture of spirit, a rupture of soul. There's a real moment. People are searching for answers, and people are looking for deeper understandings of who they are, where they fit, who their community is, what their people are. And I hear it across the board. Organizers who I talk with who are saying, I think I need God, who have been atheists their whole lives, or folks who I know. I mean, there's an elder Quaker who said, I really need to deepen my practice to stay stable in these times. So I think that's part of this moment that we're in. So that was my way of stabilizing. So holding on to a tradition that I've been next to, but haven't held as my own, that I'm now holding as my own.
So how are you working all of this out in practice? What does resistance actually look like right now?
So right now, one of the things that we've been teaching people is some traditional nonviolence theory. We've been teaching people that power does not reside just alone in the people who are so-called power holders or the elites or people on the top of the chart, of the organizational chart, but in people who do things for a living, in labor, in the work. Gene Sharp, I think, said it succinctly. He said, look, a ruler by themselves they do not milk cows, they do not build roads, they do not create postage stamps, they do not deliver packages, they don't do those things. People do them. And so if people refuse to consent, then unjust rulers cannot continue to rule. But there's a sort of Quaker belief in there that one could assert, at least. I don't typically frame it this way, but it can be framed this way, which is each person both has worth and they also have a role in society that they can play. And by adjusting their role, they can make a difference in how things happen. So what's this look like? So, well, I'll give one example of non-cooperation in these times, which largely went unnoticed, despite its large numbers. So Elon Musk at one point ordered everybody in the federal workforce, about 2 million plus people, to report to him effectively through the OMB and give a 5-line email about what they were up to. And immediately after this email went out, federal workers began organizing on Signal chats. I happened to be next to some of them as they were chatting with each other and saying, we don't have to do this. Actually, he's not our boss. We're not going to comply with this thing. And so they began saying to each other, don't do this. Don't send an email back. That began organizing within unions. That then followed where even some of the sycophants in Donald Trump's crew, so Patel and Rubio and others, I think as they were seeing that their workers were not going to comply, began just making an official policy. So telling the FBI, you don't have to reply to this email, and on and on. And it was only, by the way, at that point that mainstream media really picked up the story and began telling the story of, oh, see, there's dissension in the ranks. But the story begins with regular individuals, regular federal worker bureaucrats who are being brave and who are not cooperating. In the end, some 1.3 million people or so defied the memo from the OMB, which makes it on par with one of the largest acts of non-cooperation that's happened in U.S. history. Isn't marked as such, hasn't been held up in that way. But it's an example of the resistance that's been up and happening. Another example of that from Sarah Inama, who's a teacher in Idaho, who was told, because of the DEI policy, she was told that she wasn't allowed to have a sign that says everyone is welcome in her school, and was threatened to be fired for doing it. And she said, fire me. It will stay up. Everyone is welcome. That's a fact in my classroom. And the community rallied around her. T-shirts with everyone is welcome they've sold out in the community, and it became a national story. And so these moments of resistance that we see can then echo out. And that gives more freedom for more teachers to stick up for DEI across the country. So a lot of what I've been doing has been storytelling, because actually our media landscape has been so poor at telling these stories of non-cooperation that's been happening. This is very important. It's very important that we mark our heroes and heroines who are doing this. It's very important that we don't just notice the shock and the fear and the capitulation stories. Those are important to take note of and important. But actually, the motion that we need is to identify the areas that are growing and to continue supporting those, swapping those stories as often as possible. Because that courage begets courage. And so when we see people being courageous and doing courageous things, and we then need to create systems that begin moving towards mass, larger scales of non-cooperation. And that is how authoritarians are destabilized and typically taken out through civil resistance.
Daniel has been tracking something remarkable. Acts of resistance happening right under our noses that are barely making headlines. When we return from the break, we'll explore what Daniel calls the 4 phases of anti-authoritarian struggle and why he believes we're currently in phase 2. Don't go anywhere. This is where things get real practical. Hey friends, mark your calendars. World Quaker Day is coming up on Sunday, October 5th, 2025. This year's theme is Love Your Neighbor, and the Friends World Committee for Consultation has created some wonderful resources to help you and your meeting engage with this powerful message. Are you planning an event? You can download special posters from the FWCC website to help you easily share the details with your local community. There are even coloring sheets for children, and to celebrate our international family, you can find a poster that helps us all learn to say love your neighbor in 11 different languages. Are you feeling musical? The website features songs from the World Quaker Songbook related to the theme, with links so you can listen and learn them ahead of time. Sing along and create some literal global harmony. For deeper reflection, explore prompts and a helpful booklet delving into the many biblical passages about loving your neighbor. Plus, you can find recent writings from friends, offering insight into the theme and how it speaks to our world today. These resources are all waiting for you. To find them and help celebrate World Quaker Day on October 5th, visit fwcc.world/World Quaker Day. That's fwcc.world/World Quaker Day. That's fwcc.world/World Quaker Day. Before the break, we heard Daniel Hunter explain how his unexpected spiritual awakening as a Quaker informs his approach to resistance. Now, let's dive into the concrete examples of civil disobedience that he's documenting, acts of courage that are happening all around us, often without recognition. These stories matter because, as Daniel puts it, courage begets courage. And right now, we need all the courage we can get.
So we're just trying to help people unstick themselves, because there really are basically, there's 4 phases in terms of anti-authoritarian struggle. Number 1 is shock. People have experienced that. Number 2 is you've got to slow it down. And that's a tough phase because it's not stopping everything. But the slowing down is very, very important, because you have to slow it down before you can stop it. So go through some shock, slow it down, stop it, and then actually win things, achievements on the other side to make sure you don't get into that situation again.
Daniel, I get the feeling listening to those around me that, people are generally tired. So what does resilience look like in this time? How can we be proactive and not just reactive?
One option is to steel ourselves to be ready to ignore and to defy orders that come through, so that when we're told to do things that we know to be wrong, that we say, no, that's wrong, I won't do it. And that's more instinctual. I think a second one that might be a little bit easier and straightforward is to identify ourselves ahead of time. What are the communities we need to be in that we're not already in? So one of the things I've been appreciating watching has been universities have been organizing defense compacts modeled after like NATO Article 5, where if they come after one of us, they come after all of us, as a way of saying we're in this together. So we can connect with them and in an explicit way show solidarity. Solidarity isn't a belief, solidarity is an action. So community building is a meaningful intervention, not just an act of solidarity, but the spaces where people get to share these deeper harborings that are inside of ourselves. And so here I lean on techniques that are not necessarily my forte, but the strategies of community building, of art, of bringing people together through music and dance. These things are very important in these times, to help rebuild and strengthen community and build resilience. And in fact, lots of authoritarian regimes have been taken down by groups who often do art in public, and that becomes part of what they do. So thinking about, since I've just mentioned South Africa, thinking about how much South African music and funerals were used as organizing opportunities. And so here, I think just returning to part of the resilience is also building for yourself some community, building for yourself some spaces that are protected, offline spaces that are protected from infiltration or feeling like you're kind of the constant bombardment. So for me, it's been having this group of people who we just get together and we talk about what is going on in these times. That becomes a protected space for me, where I get to just show up as my full self and fall apart and do all the various things that are important in terms of my emotional journey that otherwise I might not have that space for. And then the last thing I'd say in terms of resilience is there's nothing like action. Being in motion feels good on the body. Just from a pure, if you're just analyzing it from an embodied experience, someone who's standing up and doing something, you're going to feel better than if you're not doing something. And so questions of effectiveness, I believe in strategy, but I believe in just get in some motion. And so for folks who haven't yet had a chance to show up at a march, join a Tesla takedown action, these are great moments to have embodied experiences, not just sign a petition that's, click on a keyboard, but have an embodied experience of being with other people who are doing some protests together, some resistance actions together, some organizing or stuffing, flyers, knocking on doors, pick your poison here, but getting in motion will help with resilience.
So Daniel, I really appreciate your energy and your encouragement. I'm reminded of the early Quakers in the 17th century who, of course, went through their own crazy political time. There was a civil war, of course, in England, and the king was executed, and there were just a lot of question marks on the future and violence and despair. So I often look back to the early Quakers as an example of a group of people who could bring a vision for a better world during a time of chaos. Those early friends were imagining a better world even when everyone around them was experiencing and navigating a worse world. And so I wonder, do you see a scenario where we come through these current troubles and end up with a society that's more whole and more just?
I hope so. I think there are two aspects of sort of authoritarian struggles in terms of sort of creating a broad front to kind of fight it, which is one is the negative coalition, which is stopping bad things. And that in some ways is a little bit of the easier one to build. Here are the things that we oppose. So then there has to be a positive coalition, a group that has vision for how do we get out of this mess. I'm not sure where it comes from at the moment. It's not that's not a place where I feel like we've clearly got it we've got it covered, we're figuring that out. I think that's an area we need work on. I think we need more articulators of what is the kind of society that we want to have, what are the pieces that we need to put into place, what are the essential ones of that. I think broadly, democracy still can resonate as a thing, but so few of us have ever lived or experienced it. The only thing I've ever been asked to do by my government has been to vote, barely that. So that's not actually much of a democracy. Democracy is a vision of representation and participation. And in fact, my government tends to repress people who involve themselves in participation. And I've been inspired by, if folks have tracked or haven't heard of the fight in South Korea, I think has been really meaningful, where they experienced a democratic backslide and fought back heavily. And actually years ago, they had a democratic backslide, did not advance their democracy, and so it backslid again. And so if we don't solve the issues that got us in this place in the first round, we'll return here again. And we'll return here again until we do. So I don't know what that looks like in terms of the broad stroke of history, but my mom's a historian, and I have a full belief that if we don't, whatever problems we don't solve, we'll get a second shot at them if we're alive to work it out. So it's on us. It's on us.
You wrote an article that went viral right after the election, and the title was 10 Ways to Be Grounded and Prepared Now That Trump Has Won. And it leapt out at me at the time as being different from what other people were writing. I think mainly because of that one word, grounded. I hear that word mostly in Quaker circles, so I was a little surprised to see it on a viral article about current events, and I was grateful to see it there. I think of our Quaker meetings, our weekly practice of gathering, as an opportunity for us all to kind of dip back into a deeper well. What Thomas Kelly might have called the eternal. There's something that happens in meeting for worship that is deeper and more true than the current tumult and fear that we're experiencing. And grounded is a good word. We're dipping down into the roots. So that makes me wonder what you're doing yourself to stay grounded, even as you're thinking about strategies for confrontation.
One thing that really helps me is having relationships and connection to people in other parts of the globe. And it's been really helpful to chat with my friend in Colombia who's experienced a war through her entire lifetime. And I think a second thing is what I keep being reminded from. So the same woman in Colombia, she was recently on a rant about how USers are always trying to talk about, are we winning? And she's like, all these Americans, US Americans, they keep asking me, like, are we winning? Are we losing? How badly are we losing? Like, are we up? Are we down? And she was just really reminding people, it isn't that. That isn't really how life is. Life is bad things and good things. Life is mess and cleanliness. Life is mushy. And rather than kind of cleaning it up by just like centralizing it into one thing, it is all of those things and holding that. And that's a practice that I think US Americans have gotten less good at. So having some connections externally has been very helpful to me. So that's like one piece. And even if I didn't have personal relationships, reading about other people's struggles and reading about movements reminds me this isn't wholly unique. We didn't have a massive failure in the US that's completely unique to every place. And that releases me a little bit from feeling like we've fully failed on the left. And I look around and notice it's a hard time. We have big issues on climate change. We have big issues on wealth inequality. We have big issues on AI. We have big issues that no one has clean answers for. But we don't have an obligation to be effective. We have an obligation to follow what Spirit tells us to do. And so let's find our role and let's go be faithful.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to our guest, Daniel Hunter. You can find out more about his work through the link in our show notes. Just go to quakerpodcast.com. You can see those links as well as discussion questions and a transcript of this episode. And there's also a place to continue this discussion with other listeners. This episode was edited and produced by Zach Jackson with help from me, John Watts. I also wrote and produced the music. The Quaker Podcast is a part of the Quaker Project. We are a nonprofit Quaker media organization dedicated to giving Quakerism a platform in the 21st century. If you like what we're up to, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. You can go to quakerpodcast.com, click support in the top right menu. It takes less than 5 minutes, and we really appreciate it.
George Lakey here.
Hey, George. This is Zach from the Quaker Podcast.
Hi, Zach. I'm not surprised you're calling at this moment.
I should hope not.
Don't you love, in the middle of all this craziness, some regularity in life?
Oh, I cherish all regularity that I can get. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to jump on a call and answer this quick question from a listener. It seems that you are much more qualified to answer this than us. So this listener sent us an email and said, "Hello. I just listened to 2 episodes of interviews with George Lakey. They were excellent and encouraging. I would like to echo that as well. My meeting is asking what we can do while at a rally or protest if there is non-peaceful action around us, such as turning our backs or sitting down or singing. I've been looking for some practical in-the-moment actions one can do. I know that if we do not feel safe, we can leave, but what other things can you suggest? I've been searching, but have just been finding writings about nonviolence in general. Thank you for any help."
Fortunately, I have an entire chapter in my book, How We Win, that focuses on exactly this kind of situation. What do we do when there's violence in the mix? And there are a number of things we can do. In fact, it's great to have half a dozen or so ideas in your head. So in the middle of it, you can decide, well, we'll try this. And that's not working. Let's try that. So here are some of the things that you'll find in Chapter 16 in How We Win. Singing can be remarkably influential in shifting a situation. Nobody expects singing. Singing is amazing. So it's good in preparing for an action to get a few songs going. That not only helps with preparation, sometimes we have training workshops to get ready for an action, and singing is a great way of bringing the group together, getting them on the same page. But also, it does familiarize people with a song or two that you can then pull out of the hat if you need it. Another thing that is very helpful is remembering that it's possible to sit down. And again, this is something you can prepare the group with ahead of time. In fact, I know one group that habitually got attacked. This was in France in the days of the Algerian War, when the peace movement in France continually did nonviolent direct action protests against the Algerian War, and were very often attacked by the frisky right wing of France at the time. And the slogan that the French developed, they told me, was, "When in doubt, sit down." So if you forget everything else I say, when in doubt, sit down. it's remarkable how much it dramatizes a shift in energy, which then invites the other side to be in consternation and confusion. Another thing is to hold hands. That's easy to do. Some of these things are easy to do together, for example, singing and holding hands. Another thing is to chant a word or two, depending on what the situation is. A handy word to have in mind is peace, and to just say that, loudly and over and over. Another one is respect. Each of those words, and you'll think of others too, are words that are basically signals of, there's an alternative behavior for you, the violent one, to consider. And I'll just keep reminding of that by saying respect. Another possibility is to pray. And Quakers might especially, and religious people might especially like to pray, but I've known some people who didn't think of themselves as religious, but found themselves praying in a tight spot, and the praying might be done silently or even out loud. Do not turn your backs when violence shows up in a scene. That is, in fact, the opposite thing of what you want to do. When you see violence on the edge of your crowd or demonstration, or violence coming at you or something, that's a great time to pay attention to it and to do it in an obvious way, such as one of the things that I've mentioned here, so it comes across to them, the ones who want to do violence or want to be threatening, you are paying attention to them. That's when they need your best attention. And it could be in the form of prayer. It could be in the form of singing, holding hands, whatever, sitting down. Paying attention to them, those who want to do violence, meets one of their needs, which is they want your attention. At the same time, as it's proactive on your part, rather than being apparently victims and just seeing what they will do, but to take an action, and they perceive it as an action. Even you're bursting into song, they will perceive as an action that responds to them and puts them in a bit of a pickle. Oh, now what do we do? And that's what we want. The ones who want to do violence, we want them to perceive us as strong and putting them in a dilemma, rather than we're scared, which is, of course, their intention. That's what they want. They want to scare us.
Oh, well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And to our listener, Nina, who sent that question in, I hope that is helpful. And for all of you out there as well, trying to engage in nonviolent ways, I cannot recommend enough that you pick up George's book, How We Win. It is so chock full of advice just like this one. So until next time, thank you for listening.